Well, the Liverpool fans and even Brendan Rodgers were absolutely furious that the club did not buy a striker in the transfer window. On Monday morning, John W. Henry, the owner, the principal owner, reacted by issuing a letter to the fans on the club's website. He admitted that he was disappointed that the club were unable to sign a striker, but he went on to defend the transfer strategy. He said that the club would not risk their future on older players. They were looking to build for the future. He blamed the previous regime. He apportioned some blame to the previous regime, said they're still correcting those mistakes, admitted that FSG have made some mistakes of their own, which of course they have. But he said the club are looking for a sustainable future. He reiterated the commitment to financial fair play, which is really, really important to Liverpool. That's one of the reasons FSG bought the club. And that was also a reason why they appointed a young, ambitious manager in Brendan Rodgers. And he said they're looking to the next 16 years, not the next 16 weeks. And I'm not sure how Liverpool fans will respond to that. It's a good piece of PR. He's talking to the fans, he's addressing their concerns. He did point out they've signed the likes of Nuri Sahin and Joe Allen and Fabio Borini in the summer. But Liverpool are desperately short of a striker. They've let Andy Carroll go on loan and they've not replaced him. And the fans aren't stupid. They know that Brendan Rodgers was desperate for a striker. They tried to sign Theo Walcott. They tried to sign Daniel Sturridge. They tried to sign Clint Dempsey and they failed with all. And Clint Dempsey is a brilliant example of what John Henry's talking about in this letter, because he said they don't want a player, a short-term player who's only going to be at the club for 2 years. Clint Dempsey's 29. FSG didn't see the long-term value in that. And the thing is, they've been in football for 2 years and they have had their fingers burnt. He admitted they made mistakes, but obviously he's not going to admit to the gravity of those mistakes. They appointed Kenny Dalglish, they appointed Damien Comolli, and they backed him. They backed them, and it didn't work out at all. It was a disaster. And Kenny Dalglish was sacked for not finishing in the top 4, and Brendan Rodgers got absolutely no chance of finishing in the top 4 with this squad. Well, the big point that John Henry made in his letter was value for money, and it's quite clear Liverpool have not had any value for money under FSG. Maybe Luis Suarez, you could argue, but they spent 20 million on Stuart Downing, they spent 18 million on Jordan Henderson, they spent 35 million on Andy Carroll. Stuart Downing is now a left back, according to Brendan Rodgers. They would have let Jordan Henderson go to Fulham, and Andy Carroll, a £35 million striker, they've let him go on loan to West Ham. And the only reason Brendan Rodgers let him go on loan, don't get me wrong, he's not a Brendan Rodgers type of player. The only reason Rodgers let him go on loan because he wanted to free up the wages to bring in another striker like Daniel Sturridge. And it hasn't happened, and he's looking at him, he's looking silly now, Brendan Rodgers, and he's even admitted that he wouldn't have let Andy Carroll go if he wasn't expecting to sign another striker. And he's a victim of the previous regime himself. It's all well and good John Henry blaming Hicks and Gillette, but now Rodgers is suffering for the mistakes made by Damien Comolli and Kenny Dalglish, who were appointed and backed by FSG. When have Liverpool lost out to Tottenham on 2 key targets? They've done it this summer. Gylfi Sigurdsson and Clint Dempsey have both signed for Tottenham and not Liverpool. And one of the reasons FSG bought Liverpool was because of the financial fair play rules being brought in by UEFA, and Henry alluded to it in his statement, in his letter. And without Champions League football, they're not going to compete for the big transfer fees. They were expecting financial fair play to rein in the likes of Chelsea and Manchester City. They've watched Chelsea go and buy Eden Hazard, Oscar, spend all this money on these huge players, and they must be wondering now whether Liverpool are ever going to break into that top 4 again. And it's a vicious circle, because without the Champions League money, they can't attract the top players, they can't afford the transfer fees, they can't afford the wages. It's all well and good Ian Air getting massive commercial deals with Warrior and Standard Chartered, but they're not going to get the big names now, and that's shown by the way they were scrapping around for loan signings and players less than £5 million on the final day of the window.